The sky above planet Delta 9 burned in shifting colors as electric clouds rolled across. The dark horizon, thick winds carrying the scent of ash and minerals, not meant for lungs of any living thing, except maybe one type of creature, the humans. This was not a battlefield, not a city or colony. This was a training ground carved by nature and left untouched by mercy. The ground cracked with heat, veins of glowing magma pulsed beneath the surface, and sharp, crystal spikes jutted out from the soil like traps designed by the planet itself. Reed stood alone in the middle of the valley, wearing nothing more than a basic pressure suit and a half-charged oxygen mask strapped to his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the hill in front of him. He had not slept properly in 2 days, and his water pack was nearly empty, but he knew better than to ask for extraction, because on Delta 9, asking for help meant failure, and failure meant dismissal. The rules were simple: survive 7 days alone, complete the 10 objectives, return alive with no assistance. If you made it, you earned your furnace rank and the right to move forward. Up in orbit, a small observation ship floated silent with its cloaking field active. 4 human officers watched Reed's progress through live feeds, studying his vitals and movements. They said nothing most of the time, only marking data, logging reactions, and noting improvements: his balance under shifting gravity, his decision making during acid rain, his calm when facing the native shadow beasts that hunted without sound. He was doing well, better than expected, and that impressed them. But Reed had no idea he was being observed. And if he did, would not have changed much, because he had trained for this since childhood, like all others in the furnace program, raised on the edge of death, taught that pain was normal, that fear was useful, and that impossible conditions were simply puzzles that hadn't been solved yet. His breath was steady, even as the air thickened with microscopic ashes steps, careful as the earth trembled below him, and his eyes sharp, scanning every movement of the land around. Far across the galaxy, in a chamber lit by golden light and lined with vines from a planet called Zarnith, the High Assembly of the Cylon Confederation watched something else. They watched the aftermath of their latest failed operation. 20 elite soldiers sent to Delta 9, only one message returned. Before silent static and a single terrified voice shouting, "This world is cursed," before it cut out forever. The general presiding over the meeting clenched his jaw, his scales twitching, as he tried to understand how a world so deadly was not only known to humans, but used by them as a tool. "This makes no sense," one of the counselors hissed through sharp teeth. "This planet kills our strongest in minutes, and the humans send their children here." The words echoed and hung heavy. Another representative spoke softly, almost whispering, "Maybe the humans have found something we do not yet understand." But the general shook his head slowly. "Not something, someone. The humans themselves are the variable." Back on Delta 9, Reed reached the 4th checkpoint, a broken tower half buried in stone, where he had to retrieve a sensor beacon before nightfall. Creatures moved beneath the rocks, their heat signatures dancing in and out of his visor's edge. But he moved like he was walking through a quiet town, not a death trap, his fingers steady as he unlocked the access panel and grabbed the beacon. Just then the storm sirens began, the sky flashing green and white in sharp bursts, and Reed's training kicked in as he ran for the canyon where he knew the wind could not follow. He reached it just in time, sliding into a crevice where the air was still dangerous but not instantly lethal, and he crouched down, resting, without sleep, just breathing slow and waiting for the storm to pass. He remembered something an old instructor told him once: "If the planet hates you, you're probably on the right path." And he smiled at the memory. While thunder shook the mountain above. In space, the observers noted the successful beacon retrieval, logged the avoidance of direct creature conflict, and marked his storm shelter choice as ideal. Another one whispered quietly to herself, "He's ready." But while humans watched one of their own survive, aliens watched too, and they trembled. Hidden deep within their own surveillance network, a Cylon analyst stared in disbelief as the human boy took shelter during a storm strong enough to rip apart steel dropships. "This cannot be real," he muttered, and sent the footage to his commanders with a single warning: do not return to that planet. Reed didn't know about any of this. His world was small now, made of rock and heat and survival. He ate from his emergency pack, chewing the nutrient bar slowly and thinking about his next move. Only 3 more checkpoints remained, and 2 more days to reach them. If he timed it right, he could conserve his oxygen pack and switch to internal breath filters for short distances, maybe even push through the final night without rest. He leaned back against the stone, watching the way the sky outside flickered like a living creature, and in that moment, despite the pain and exhaustion, despite the risk, he felt peace, because this was the way of his kind, born not to conquer planets, but to endure them until the planet surrendered. Elsewhere, a new order was being formed quietly, an emergency summit planned among alien leaders, with only one item on the agenda: the human problem. Not what weapons they use or ships they fly, but what they become when they train where others die. And in the darkness of Delta 9, Red closed his eyes for just a moment, ready for tomorrow, ready for whatever else the planet would throw at him, because to him this was not punishment. This was preparation, and in his heart he believed one thing: without doubt, if you cannot survive the furnace, you do not belong in the fire. The next morning on Delta 9 came not with sunlight, but with a red haze that hung in the air like a slow-burning poison. The skies were still, twitching with the last remnants of the electromagnetic storm as the temperature continued to climb steadily, making every breath heavier and every step slower. Reed moved through it like it was routine, his boots scorched from the molten fragments scattered across the rocky path, his oxygen monitor blinking low but not yet critical. He was now approaching his 5th checkpoint, the cliff sector known simply as Echo Spine, named for the strange sound it made when the winds passed through the narrow ridges, almost like a voice whispering across the void. His visor readings flickered erratically, and his thermal scope was useless in this zone, because the ground itself was as hot as the predators hiding within it. So he relied on instinct, on memory, and on the rhythm of his heartbeat, which had become his internal compass. He stopped only once to adjust the broken strap on his pack, then kept going without looking back, because looking back was something people did when they had the luxury of safety, and here there was no such thing. Above in orbit, the human observation vessel continued its silent monitoring, the officers now joined by a senior commander whose arms were folded behind his back and eyes locked on Reed's feed. The young man's stats were holding strong, his hydration was low, but his body was adapting, using muscle reserves to stay upright, and every movement showed control. The commander did not speak much, but when he did, others listened. And now he said one simple thing quietly enough that it barely reached the others: if he survives Echo Spine, he will be furnace grade. Meanwhile, far away across the stars in the Cylon Confederation war room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The holograms of Delta 9's surface projected across the central chamber, and the council members stood in silence, watching one specific piece of footage, captured by their last scouting drone: a human walking through plasma rain, shielding his face with nothing but his arm, and laughing, not screaming, not running, just laughing. That image had circulated across several allied species, by now some calling it a fabrication, others calling it prophecy, and none of them knowing what to do with it. One younger delegate stepped forward, voice shaky and uncertain: perhaps we should communicate, perhaps diplomacy. But the older voices silenced him with sharp glances. You do not talk to beings who drink fire and call it water. One said they train on planets that make ours scream and die. What do you suppose we offer them, peace or surrender? Back on Delta 9, Reed reached the edge of Echo Spine and paused for the pause. First time in hours he looked out over the jagged canyon filled with shifting rocks and wind that howled like it was alive. The drop below him was steep, and the path across was narrow, but he did not hesitate. Instead, he reached into his belt, took out a climbing hook, and began to move across the spine, one hand after another, slow, steady, focused. The wind lashed against his body, and small stones sliced against his suit, leaving thin cuts in the outer layer. He felt the heat rising from the cracks below, saw the flicker of movement in the shadows down beneath. But he didn't stop, he didn't even blink, because pain was part of the course, and fear was fuel, and this was what he was made for. Halfway across, his grip slipped for just a second, and the stone gave way under his boot, but he caught himself with one hand and steadied his breath, forcing his body to stay calm. He used his other hand to hammer the hook into the nearest crack, and kept climbing slowly, inch by inch, until he reached the opposite side, and pulled himself over the ledge, collapsing in the dust, but not unconscious, not broken, just breathing hard and smiling, because he knew that was the hardest part of the route. In orbit, the commander nodded once, marking the log with a green tag. His voice: "Steady, promote this one, prepare his next trial, and notify the ground crew to monitor for extraction window within 30 hours. The officers began transmitting quiet instructions while the feed continued to show Reed as he gathered himself and began moving toward the 6th checkpoint, where he would have to face one of the planet's most dangerous zones, the Shifting Valley, a place where gravity surged unpredictably, and creatures invisible to most scanners waited in silence. On another world, another council met, not human this time, but part of a splintered faction of the Coalition, who now believed that war with humanity was no longer an option. Not because they were weak, but because humans were too different, too evolved. In a direction no one else could follow. They were no longer just a species, they were a phenomenon. One of them, an elder who had fought in battle centuries ago, said slowly, "If you build strength by walking through death itself, then you do not fear war, you become war." Reed reached the outskirts of the Shifting Valley just as night began to fall. But on Delta 9, night did not bring cold, it brought silence, and that silence was more dangerous than any noise. He made camp within a rock crevice, setting small heat traps around him to deter local predators, and chewing another ration bar while checking his wristpad for mission updates. Nothing new, only his vitals and a quiet pulse confirming that his signal was still live. He leaned back against the stone and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the wind outside and the strange low hum of the valley. It sounded almost like a machine breathing slow and deep. He smiled again, not because he was safe, but because he was closer now. Only one more day, and he would be ready, not just to survive, but to return forged and tested and maybe even changed. Above him in the sky, hidden behind the clouds and storms and fire, a satellite turned slowly, tracking him like a guardian and sending his signal home. A signal not of victory yet, but of progress, and in the halls of command, both human and alien, his name was already being whispered as a symbol of something greater, something that would shape the galaxy, not by force, but by will. In the far sector of the Orion Belt, within the vast expanse of neutral space, the Grand Assembly of the Galactic Council gathered under the shadow of fear and confusion. The chamber was filled with delegates from 23 alien civilizations, most of them once proud rulers of their regions, now reduced to uncertain voices and shaking hands. The reason was simple: a single word, repeated across military reports and intercepted transmissions from the Outer Rim. Humans. Not human ships, not human weapons, just the humans themselves. Their actions defied logic, their training methods bordered on suicidal. Their recruits endured planets that melted armor and boiled blood, yet they survived, and worse, they evolved. The delegates stood around a projection in the center of the chamber, a rotating three-dimensional image of Delta 9 pulsing red with danger markers. The data feed showed atmospheric conditions, impossible to adapt to temperatures spiking past the safety threshold of most known species, acidic storms, corrosive air, gravitational shifts, bioorganic hunters, and unstable tectonics. It was labeled Class Sigma Black, a designation previously used only for planetary anomalies and no-fly zones, and yet humans used it for basic military training. One voice broke the silence, a tall, thin being with silver skin and eyes that glowed faintly. "We sent our finest battalion to this world, elite shock troopers trained across 100 environments there. Armor was reinforced, their bodies enhanced. They were wiped out in less than 8 minutes. No survivors, not even escape pods. Another voice cut in rough and sharp. They were not wiped out by weapons. There were no human forces present, no mines, no orbital strikes. The planet itself killed them, and yet humans walk on its surface like it is a garden trail. How is this possible? The room buzzed with murmurs. One diplomat tried to suggest retreat, another whispered about potential alliance, but the consensus was slowly turning darker, not toward peace but toward fear, toward action. Meanwhile, on Delta 9, Reed was awake before the valley stirred. His body rested, but never truly relaxed, his breath slow and his limbs steady as he packed his supplies and reviewed his route. The shifting valley lay ahead, a vast zone known for its gravitational instability, where cliffs moved without warning, and the air grew heavy at random intervals, designed not by intention, but by chaos itself. His mission was simple: reach the beacon buried at the base of the valley and return within 12 hours. Failure to do so meant disqualification, or worse, being left behind. He checked his wristpad once more. The signal was weak but present, and without wasting time, he moved forward, his pace confident, his mind clear. As he entered the valley, the ground beneath him shifted subtly, the rocks groaning under invisible pressure. The sky above crackled with thin blue lines of energy. Reed kept his balance by focusing on his breathing, aligning each step with the pulse of the earth, his body adjusting to every small change in gravity. He had been trained for this from simulations, to mock environments, but nothing ever truly matched the reality of the shifting valley. Above the valley, an invisible drone hovered silently, capturing every movement, every breath, every reaction. Data streamed to the observation vessel, where the commander and his officers continued to watch, recording the time spent in each sector. Comparing it to previous trainees, Reed's performance was above average. His instincts sharp, his reactions clean. He made efficient decisions and avoided unnecessary risks, even as the environment grew more hostile. Back in the Galactic Council chamber, tension rose as new footage was shared. A clip taken from an alien probe hidden in Delta 9's orbit. It showed a group of human cadets, not soldiers, not officers, mere cadets, laughing as they struggled to set up tense during a gravity spike. One of them fell 5 meters, rolled down a slope, and got back up without complaint, bleeding from the forehead, but still smiling. They called it cardio challenge and joked about the meal packs tasting worse than the sulfur pits. The room fell silent again. Some looked horrified, others confused. But one elder delegate whispered softly, "This is not military training. This is transformation." On Delta 9, Reed reached the marker beacon. It was buried under a collapsed stone structure. He cleared the debris quickly using a compact tool from his kit and extracted the beacon, then began his return trek. But the valley did not stay calm. The gravity shifted more violently, now pulling downward, then sideways. Rocks lifted from the ground, and trees twisted in unnatural directions. Creatures stirred from the shadows, blind but drawn by movement and sound. Reed kept his pace unchanged, his eyes scanning for patterns, his body flowing through the chaos like water around stone. As he climbed out of the valley, his suit torn in several places, his oxygen low and his muscles aching, he reached a ledge and looked back over the route he had taken behind him. The valley seemed to move as if alive, pulsing with silent rhythm. A place of death to others, but to him it was a place of proof, a reminder of what humans had become: not conquerors, but survivors, not rulers, but reshapers. He whispered to himself, not out of pride, but clarity. This is what we do. We go where others fall, and we rise. Far above the planet, another transmission reached the council chambers. This one from a separate alien race, unaffiliated with the Cylon Confederation, offering intelligence in exchange for neutrality. The message was short: humans are preparing for something bigger. They are not expanding territory, they are building endurance. They do not speak of war, but they are preparing for one. And they are doing it on the bones of planets that kill the rest of us without effort. The council fell into heated debate. Some demanded preemptive strikes. Others called for containment. But none of them could answer the question that burned in every mind. If the humans consider these planets mere training, what will they become once they enter the battlefield for real? Reed reached the 6th checkpoint and activated the beacon. sending a clear signal to the observation ship above. The mission was nearly complete. He had one more objective before extraction and promotion, and though his body screamed for rest, his mind was already calculating the shortest path through the razor plane, his final challenge. In that moment, as his signal lit up on the human vessel and his name was logged under high-performing candidates across the galaxy, his image appeared on alien threat boards, marked not as a soldier, not as a fighter, but as a symbol, the first sign of a new kind of power, one that did not rely on technology or numbers, but on will, on adaptation, on the quiet, brutal strength to call death a teacher and walk away stronger. The razor plane was silent, but it was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came before a great storm, a silence that swallowed sound and made every heartbeat feel louder than thunder. Under the ash-colored sky, the ground stretched flat and endless, covered in metallic dust that shimmered with a dull glow, each grain sharp enough to slice through fabric. The winds moved, low like crawling things biting at the skin and dancing in strange spirals that left trails in the dirt. Reed stood at the edge of this wasteland, knowing that this would be his final test, his final step toward completion, and even as the heat pressed down on him like the weight of a star, he did not hesitate. He adjusted his gear, checked the remaining power in his wristpad, and moved forward one step at a time, each one slow and steady, because the razor plane was not a place where speed helped. Here, it was balance that mattered, patience that kept you breathing, and instinct that guided your feet, because the real danger was not the heat, not the dust, not even the radiation that pulsed from the deep cracks in the earth. It was the hidden shifts beneath the surface, sudden pockets of gravity traps that opened without warning, pulling down anything that stood too long in the wrong spot. As he moved, Reed kept his eyes low, his boots finding solid places to rest, his body slightly tilted to counter the crosswinds that rose and fell like waves. He remembered the stories told in training of cadets swallowed whole by the planes, of those who ran and fell, or froze and vanished. He did not plan to join them. His focus was absolute, his path carefully measured, every movement deliberate and silent. High above in the observation vessel, the atmosphere was tense, officers watching Reed's progress in silence. Data streaming across the screens showing pressure levels, oxygen flow, brain activity, and muscle strain. The numbers were high but not critical. He was nearing the limits of his endurance, but he showed no signs of breaking. The commander watched closely, arms crossed and eyes narrowed. He had seen many fail at this stage, some collapsing from heat stroke, others pulled underground by shifting ground. But this one was different. This one moved like he understood the rhythm of the planet itself. And far across the stars in the alien council chambers, a decision had been made. Fleets were mobilized, warships prepared for a preemptive strike. Their target was not Earth, not human colonies, not military bases. It was the training worlds, the so-called death planets. They believed that by destroying these planets, they could shatter the foundation of human strength, prevent further escalation, eliminate the roots before the tree could grow too large. The plan was bold and desperate, fueled by fear and whispers, and the silent footage of humans surviving what should be certain death. Back on Delta 9, Reed reached the center of the razor plane, where the ground was darker and the air thicker. A strange hum filled the air, a low vibration that buzzed in the bones and made every step feel heavier. The sky above was shifting, clouds swirling unnaturally, forming shapes that came and went like ghosts. He paused for a moment, scanning the terrain ahead, and spotted the last marker, a beacon half buried in a slope of black stone, guarded not by soldiers or machines, but by the fury of the planet itself. He began the final approach, each step taking more effort, each breath slower and deeper. The winds screamed now, pulling at his arms and legs, dust cutting across his visor, leaving thin scratches on the surface. The ground beneath him trembled with small pulses, as if warning him to turn back, but he did not stop. He moved forward, eyes locked on the beacon, heart steady, every nerve alive with focus and fire. The beacon was less than 30 meters away when the first gravity surge hit without warning the earth beneath. Reed's feet shifted and pulled down the pull so sudden and strong that it nearly snapped his knee. He dropped low, rolled, and drove his fingers into the dirt, anchoring himself as the ground tried to swallow him whole. He growled through clenched teeth, pulled himself free and kept moving, climbing the slope like it was a living thing trying to shake him off. Another pulse hit harder this time, the stones cracking and rising into the air before crashing down around him. One struck his shoulder and knocked him sideways. Pain burst through his body, but he ignored it. Reached the beacon with blood dripping from his arm and activated the signal light. It blinked once, twice, then turned green. The final objective complete. His trial finished. Reed collapsed beside the beacon, eyes closing for a moment as his body cooled from within. The pain in his arm sharp and deep, but clean. He felt the ground calm slightly, the wind slowing, the silence returning. But now it was a silence of respect, not threat, a silence earned. Observation vessel confirmed beacon activation and immediately began preparations for extraction. A drone dispatched to bring him back. The commander exhaled slowly and turned away from the screens, his voice quiet and certain. Assign him furnace class. Immediately prepare him for high-risk deployment. The officers saluted in unison, but far away the alien fleet had already launched ships moving fast through slipstreams, closing in on Delta 9 with weapons primed and orders locked. Destroy the training world, wipe it clean, leave no trace. As the extraction drone neared the surface, the human sensors detected incoming energy signatures. Alarms flared and warnings blared, but it was already too late. The first alien missile struck the upper atmosphere, setting off waves of fire and impact storms. Reed opened his eyes as the ground shook around him, saw the sky bloom with explosions, and the drone spiraling in smoke. The attack had begun, but this was not war. It was panic disguised as strategy. The aliens had not come to conquer, they had come to erase. And in doing so, they had declared something far more dangerous than war. They had declared fear, and in that declaration they had revealed their weakness. Reed rose slowly, pain flaring in his limbs, but his stance unshaken. He looked up at the falling fire, saw the drone scatter, and knew the training was over. Now came something else, something greater, and in the command chambers back on Earth, the signal confirmed one simple fact: the furnace was ready. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant when a human stopped training and started fighting. The sky above Delta 9 burned with fire, the air tore apart with every explosion, and yet the man who had survived its storms and walked across its razor plains stood tall in the chaos. His name was not written in legend, not carved into monuments, not praised in songs, but his presence on this planet now, under attack, became a symbol of something ancient and dangerous, something forged not in metal, but in struggle and fire. Reed moved through the rising heat with slow precision, his steps balanced even as the earth shook beneath him and the sky cracked open like a shattered window. The alien fleet rained destruction upon the surface, their warships floating above like angry gods, their weapons screaming down without mercy or reason, because this was not a military operation, it was fear unleashed. Fear of what humanity had become, fear of the death worlds that had turned fragile flesh into tempered steel. They believed if they erased the planets, they could erase the strength, they could bury the truth before it consumed the stars. But they had arrived too late. The training was done, the program was complete. The furnace had finished its work, and Reed was no longer a trainee, no longer a test subject, no longer a survivor. He had become something else entirely, something even he could not name yet, but every movement, every breath now came from a place deeper than instinct, beyond endurance, beyond pain. The extraction drone, still burning from the atmospheric blast, crashed 2 kilometers east of his position. No communication, no support, no command orders, just static in his ear and fire in his path. But Reed did not panic, did not retreat, did not curse the sky. Instead, he studied the trajectory of the wreck, calculated the likely angle of survival, and began walking toward the site. While above him, the clouds bled fire in orbit. Human command had already received the signal. The fleet was mobilizing faster than most species could respond. Thousands of ships blinking into existence like ghosts returning to a haunted battlefield, but they did not fire, not yet, because the orders were not to attack. The orders were to observe, to allow the truth to show itself without interference, to allow the furnace to reveal what it had made. Reed reached the crash zone, found the drone half buried in a crater, its wings torn, its core unit pulsing faintly, and inside the rescue pilot, unconscious but breathing. The impact had shattered half the hull, but the protective interior had done its job. Reed pulled the pilot free, dragging him through the dust toward a safer zone, his own injuries slowing him down, his muscles tearing under pressure, but his grip never weakening, because no matter what happened, he had already passed through the fire, and now nothing left could burn him. Above the chaos, the alien admirals watched their scans blank with confusion. No enemy fighters, no weapon grids, no resistance. Just one man moving through destruction, carrying another like it was a task as normal as breathing. They could not understand it. They could not accept it. They demanded explanations. They demanded logic, but none came, because there was no strategy in what they saw, only purpose, only something raw and primal that existed outside the calculations of war. More ships descended, hoping to find command centers or human armies, but found only silence and smoke. And then they found the recordings, thousands of them, scattered across the terrain, embedded in rocks, stored in drones, buried in broken structures. Footage of humans training, suffering, bleeding, laughing, speaking to each other across impossible terrain. And in every frame was the same tone, calm, focused, fearless. One commander ordered the retrieval of a fallen satellite, thinking it might offer strategic value. Instead, it showed a young girl, 15 years old, crawling through ice fields with one leg broken, speaking to herself as she reached her goal, repeating the phrase again and again. If I can stand, then I can walk, and if I can walk, then I can run, and if I can run, then I can fight. The alien fleets began to pull back, unsure of what they were facing, unsure of how to respond, because they had not found a weakness. They had found a mirror showing them everything they lacked. Back on Delta 9, Reed had reached a sheltered ridge and was working to stabilize the injured pilot, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency, his body responding through sheer will. The fire around them had quieted. The enemy ships now holding position, unsure if they had won or simply survived something far greater than a battle. And Reed looked up into the smoke-filled sky and knew the war had already ended, because wars are won not by weapons, but by what lives through them. The human fleet finally broke silence, their transmission reaching every ship and outpost within the sector, a simple broadcast sent in a dozen languages for clarity. It said, "We trained where you died, not because we hate war, but because we know it, and when you came to kill our path, you made your choice. You feared what we would become. Now, see what you have made." The aliens received it in silence. No answer, no reply, only retreat, because they understood finally that this was not the beginning of human war, it was the end of theirs. Reed stood tall, his eyes still locked on the fading lights above his breathing, slow, his stance calm, his mission now complete, not just in task, but in purpose. The furnace had forged more than soldiers. It had forged legends, and across the stars, others would follow in his steps, walking where planets screamed, enduring where others perished, and carrying with them the simple, unbreakable truth: you cannot destroy what has already survived the impossible. And in that truth, humanity stood unchallenged, not because they conquered, but because they endured, because they stepped into the fire and emerged unchanged. And from that moment forward, the galaxy remembered the name of the place, not as a death world, not as a training ground, but as the beginning of a new age, one shaped not by empires but by Willand. Reed walked on the end,